right, so today we're going to get this carburetor off of here, and we're going to get the intake manifold out, and we're going to put the intake manifold and carburetor on that are going on, the replacements. So let's get started. Now this just pulls off, but first I'm going to loosen my throttle cables so I can slide them out of there easily. Now this is a stock CV carb, so all we got to do to take this off is just pull it off. Here is the idle side. There's the throttle side. And that just comes off. Now we'll unplug this, pop that out of there, and then we just need a 1/4 inch to take those out. There's 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. And I have a fancy one with a ball on one end and it's bent. And I just have a normal Allen that I chopped off. So you don't have to spend the money on the fancy one. This one works fine. That one's loose. I'm going to use the fancy one because I have it and it works better. Sorry, didn't mean to bump you there. There we go. Pull screw broke loose. Let's go to the other side. Just move this plug wire over. Maybe. There we go. Same thing, just break this loose. This one's a little shorter, it works better on this side. Normally there'd be an engine mount right here that's in the way. We already removed that earlier when we removed the gas tank. Make sure your wrench is seated in there good, because these bolts are kind of a pain in the ass to get a hold of if you wreck them. So if you strip the head, you're screwed. Well, not really. You can find them, but they can be a pain in the ass to get. But if you do strip the head on these, do not reuse that bolt, because it'll be a son of a bitch to get out again if you ever have to. And it's real easy to create intake leaks on these when you put them together if you don't use enough grease on your manifold gaskets. So these two we just loosen up nice and loose. And the other two have to come out all the way. Now that our bolts are loose on the other side, we can thread these two all the way out. And now we should be able to just wiggle this out of here. More or less. It's pretty cold, so our gaskets don't want to let go. But there we go. There we go. I got a clean rag with a little contact cleaner. Get that cleaned up nice. Probably wear gloves when you use this stuff. I'm sure it's bad for you. This is the kind of stuff that soaks in through your skin, gets into your blood, and gives you liver cancer. But there we go. So on to the next step. So next, we need the flanges off the old manifold, and we need some new manifold gaskets. So our flanges are marked with an F and an R right here. There's a front and a rear, and there is a difference. So you can't just slap them on, because it won't like it. So let's get our flanges cleaned up. And let's get a little grease. All right, so back to where we were. You want to grease these up good, or you'll wind up with a vacuum leak. And you don't want a vacuum leak. Vacuum leaks are no fun. So, just a nice film of grease over the whole thing. Any chassis grease is fine. The beveled side of your flange points toward the head, and the beveled side of your gasket goes into the beveled side of the flange. I'm just going to get any excess off the inside of the manifold. All right, we're good there. You'll also notice this has a map sensor, and this has no place for a map sensor. I'll show you how we'll deal with that in a few minutes. So now we take our manifold and make sure our little notches in our flange are pointed the right way. And we just kind of slide him in there. Maybe. And I'm going to walk around the other side and make sure those are lined up. And they are. So now, let me just get these little manifold bolts started back in. And it looks like my cooling fins are interfering with my manifold. So let's see, because this does want to tip down a little more. I guess that's why I couldn't find specifically the correct manifold for this this year bike. It's okay, I have a cure for those. Alright, so I very carefully with a Dremel clearanced these cooling fins. So hopefully my manifold will fit now. The blue tape is your friend. You're going to use a lot of it. Oh, that's still nice and clean and greasy. And that fits real nice now. And that rear one still wants to cross thread. All right, I'm gonna have to clearance the manifold a little as well. Because as you can see, this casting isn't terrible, but maybe it's not the best. Give it one more shot. It's going. It is pretty tight against that manifold, though. I don't really like that. So we'll pull that back out of there, and I'll just clearance that manifold a little bit, and then it'll work better. So this is an S&S intake manifold for a big twin, and if you notice, it's clearanced out real nice for your bolts to go in for your manifold flanges. This one for my Sporty, they're not clearanced out very well. So I'm going to kind of shave some of this excess material away with a Dremel, and that will allow my bolts to fit in without pushing against the actual manifold, and then it can be where it needs to be and be happy in there. So here we go. I'll be using this Dremel with a burr bit, so it's going to take off a lot pretty fast, and it's going to be really loud. Here we go. Well, let's see if that's going to work. All right, we got everything all cleaned up. I think our clearances are going to work. Let's give her a shot. Oh, that is much better. All right, I'm going to thread the back ones down a little bit. You got to kind of go a little bit at a time, front and back, and on the other side and this side, because you want to bring them down fairly evenly. And you want to end up with your manifold flanges flush against the head. Now, I don't know if my bolt is going to fit through there, so we should probably find out. It is not. It is not. So I'm going to put that in first. I have an extension and a socket that'll reach through and grab that, but the head of the bolt's too fat to fit between the cooling fins. All right, so they're all seated all the way down, nice and flush and flat and even. So now I'm just going to make it nice and tight. And that's tight. And my long extension does reach that bolt. So we're good. So the next thing we have to do is deal with this map sensor, because our ignition advance won't be right if that's not hooked up. So first we need to take it off this manifold. Then we want to take this little rubber piece off. Because remember, my manifold isn't drilled for one of these. Very carefully, because this is an expensive part. Now we take a piece of vacuum line and put on there and put on the intake manifold. I'm actually going to use this vacuum elbow that came off the old fuel valve. There we go. That's off of there. Stick it right on here. Just like so. So now that I've got my elbow on here, on my sensor, I just push it onto my vacuum tap on the manifold, and that should give us the map sensor reading that the ignition computer wants to give us the proper ignition advance. All right, next let's jet the carb. So in our happy book here, we've got recommended jetting. So for an 883, we want 265 to 028. So I'm guessing that's supposed to be 265 to 280. Intermediate jet and a 66 main jet. And once that's just a starting point. So once we start the bike and ride it around, we'll adjust the jets as needed. But that'll give us a good place to start. We may wind up going bigger or smaller, but so here she is, the big S&S Super E. It is my opinion that these are about the best carburetors for your Harley Davidson, but that's strictly my opinion. Someone else might have a different opinion, and they're entitled to use what they like. Now our little accelerator pump arm here is going to sort of go into the float bowl. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful not to lose this O-ring. And it's okay that the screws fell out. So our main jet right now is a 70. And we want a 66. So we'll start there. 66. And intermediate wants to be 265 to 268. 265. And 280. So those are the two jets we'll use to start off with. I think the main jet always has a 70 in it when you buy the carburetor. And I'm not sure what the intermediate jet usually is. Let's get this gasket off and then we might be able to see. got a 295 in it, so we don't want to use that. It's going to be way too fat. Those only need to be kind of snug. And emulsion tube's a half. You gotta kind of be gentle with this stuff because it's all just brass. So it's easy to mangle it. All right, we'll put our gasket back on. Float set just right, so I don't have to worry about that. So I gotta make sure everything goes properly back into its little holes, because there's a lot of passages in this float bowl. But it's all happy. There we go. These need to be fairly good and snug. You don't want your float bowl to leak. You also don't need to murder them. There's kind of a fine line. There we go. Now I need my throttle. Oops. And just a little drop of blue Loctite. Or maybe a big drop. There we go. So there's a little nub right here and a little cutout that looks like that. Stick that guy on there. Easiest way to do this is with a magnet. But I don't have one, so I'll fight with it with my fingers. I don't know if you can even see me. There we go. Now we'll go ahead and set our presets. Alright, so I'm going to go over the settings on the carburetor. This is your manifold side. This actually bolts to the bike, so when it's on the bike you're looking at it this way, and you've got this adjustment screw, this one, and this one down here, right here. That's your idle adjustment, that's your idle fuel mixture, and that's your accelerator pump. So the accelerator pump we're not going to mess with right now. We'll adjust that once it's running and on the bike. Our idle, the initial adjustment, I don't know how well you can see, but right down here is where the idle screw touches our throttle spool. The throttle spool actually works the throttle and opens the butterfly. And it also, if I can get a hold of it, turns and pumps our accelerator pump. So when you give it gas, it squirts gas into the carb like an accelerator pump should. So initial setup. Looking right here. We want to back out our idle screw until it's not touching the throttle spool. Run it down until it just contacts, and then we add a half a turn. Idle mixture screw, we run it all the way in, and you don't have to run it in hard, just until it stops, because it's easy to break this screw. And we want 1.5 turns out. So there's a half turn, there's 1 turn, there's 1.5. That's our initial carb setup, and then when we start the bike up, we'll fine tune it. All right, next we'll put the backing plate together. All right, let's get this backing plate put together. So we've got a slotted pan head screw, a nylon washer, another nylon washer, a wave washer, a brass washer, and a little steel washer. And they all go on here for this guy. This goes like this, and we stack all that stuff on there. So let's do it. So first a wave washer, then a steel washer, then a nylon washer, now this guy, now another nylon washer and our brass washer, and there's a little shoulder on this brass washer, and that sits on the nylon washer and goes toward your choke lever. Now a little drop of blue Loctite. This is the back side of the backing plate, by the way. And if you install all this stuff wrong, your choke lever will be floppy and your choke won't stay on. So if you miss any of the pieces, it ain't gonna work right. But if everything's on there the way it should be tight but smooth. And that screw should be all the way down and seated. Next, we've got these two little plugs that go in these two holes. So, blue Loctite again. And I want them in nice and tight, because those prevent air from leaking past the air filter, so you don't get dirt and crud into your carburetor. With a different setup, you might have breather tubes that go in there or something. But in this application, we're using those plugs. There it is, our backing plate's assembled. Okay, let's get the carburetor on. So, we get our carburetor. And we've got our little phenolic block. So the side with the gasket goes to the intake manifold. And again, the side with the gasket goes to the intake manifold. So now, throttle cables. This is the idle side. The idle side has the spring. That's in. Slide that down in there. Grab our throttle side. That goes there. This goes this way. There we go. I don't want to tighten those tight yet, because I need to get my backing plate on first. If I tighten those down tight, I might not have the wiggle room I need to make those line up. All right, now that our carburetor is on, we're going to put our breathers on. So I got a breather and two little rubberized metal washers. And my breather bolt. So we stack those all up like so. And that goes right there in the breather hole in the head. You want to sort of point the breathers toward the middle. If they're pointed slightly up or down, that's all right. Same deal on the other cylinder head. You want to keep your little washers nice and centered and tight. Now we'll just snug those down. Now these are not super strong. You don't need to put a ton of smoke on them. You just need them pretty snug. About like that. So, with our backing plate, we've got this gasket, and we need to make sure that our 3 bolt holes and our vent hole all line up with our 3 bolt holes and our vent hole on the carburetor. Maybe you can see it a little better. This vent hole allows air in and out of the float bowl so that gas can come in. And then you got your 3 bolts that hold the backing plate to the carb. So your gasket has to line up like so with your 3 bolt holes and your vent hole on your backing plate. So now that our gasket's lined up where we need it. We need to also remember this fork needs to go in the groove on our fuel enricher circuit. Otherwise, we won't have a choke. So I'm going to take my 3 little bolts, which already have Loctite on them, so we don't need to add more. I'm going to use the bolts to hold the gasket, and I'm going to just kind of line everything up. And start my little screws. Now those are snug, and my choke's going to work. So I'm going to just go ahead and tighten these down. And those are nice and snug. That's not going anywhere. And I can see that my vent hole is good. So, vent hole goes right through. The gasket's not in the way. So I got that right. My fork is on my fuel enricher. So I will have a choke. So now I can bolt these down with the bolts that go in them, and then I can tighten the carburetor down to the manifold. These are my bolts that hold the backing plate to the head. Just a little drop of blue Loctite. There we go. Now, I'll tighten the bolts that hold the carburetor to the manifold. And that should be good to go. So next, we need our breather hose. So our breather hose goes from these two to this guy, like this, and we want to try not to kink it, which is going to be tough with this one pointed kind of up. So I'm going to just make an adjustment to that. And you have to cut it to length. There we go. So I'm going to want to cut that right about there. It's better to leave it too long and have to cut it a couple times than to cut it short and be screwed. nip just a little more off. That'll be just right. Now snip a little bit off of this end. Got a kink, so I need to cut a little more. Cut off just a little bit more. Didn't quite cut it straight the first time. And that looks pretty happy. So now I'll put my little clamps on. So this just uses these little spring clamps. And one little worm gear clamp. That should be all right. If it becomes problematic later, I'll deal with it. want some more on the idle side. Perfect. Just like that. Now I can tighten my lock nuts. And the throttle cables are not going to pull out on me. That leaves me just a little more play than I'd like, but I can't really help it. It's not too bad. Not much I can do without replacing the throttle cables, and I'm trying to keep this on a fairly tight budget. Don't remember if these are 3/8 or 7/16. 3/8. Yeah, that's happy. Now I'll show you how we put these back on. There we go. So underneath here there's a tube for the fuel line. I might actually end up needing a longer fuel line because this is not going to get stuff through here or there. It's going to have to come up and around like so. That actually should be fine. Here's my fuel line. And hopefully that'll reach the petcock on the gas tank. Hopefully it doesn't interfere with the other end of the throttle. Might have just enough. We'll see. This is the overflow line. So I'm just going to sneak this right through here. Run it back down through there, where it would originally go, and it plugs onto a nice little brass nipple. So that lives right here, and you just kind of fish it around, poke it down through where it's not going to interfere with anything, and it can just drain the any overflowed fuel from the carb away from the exhaust and onto the ground. Here's our fancy filter. This is a reusable type of air filter. This one's already clean and oiled and everything and ready to go. And here's our sweet S&S teardrop. Turning this backwards so I can feel where that thread starts. And I can't feel it. There it is. This goes on and it squishes that filter right down tight. So you get a good seal all the way around. So there. Looks like a bike again now.